Welcome to the Sandwich Generation podcast, a resource for adults balancing the dual responsibilities of raising children and caring for aging parents. Whether you're helping your parents downsize, explore real estate options, navigating caregiving, or looking for practical advice to help your family thrive, this is the place for you. Join us as we bring you expert insights, heartfelt stories, and actionable items to support you and your family within this unique generation. Hello.
Hello there.
Hello.
Hi, Robin. I told Sara before we started recording our history, Robin, that you were actually, I knew your mother first, way back in like the early 2000s when I lived in Kokomo. And then that you were a past client of mine. And then I saw you working for the Alzheimer's Association. And I was like, we have to have her on our show. So
yeah, I was thinking about today and remembering how helpful you were to us as a realtor, because we've, sold a few homes, bought a few homes for you. And I remember we were on vacation. It was the final, right before our house sold, and during the inspection, a tree fell.
Yes, I remember that.
On our property on the fence. And we got this call while we were away, like, hey, you're supposed to sell your house next week. There's a tree laying on the fence. And you helped us through that. So, oh my gosh.
I do remember that now. Thanks for the reminder. Fun things like that happen in real estate, right?
You probably should not have remembered that, actually. That was probably something you want to forget.
We'll block that out.
Nice. Well, okay. Well, welcome back to the Sandwich Generation. Just do a quick intro here, Robin. So you are now the Community Engagement Manager at the Alzheimer's Association of Indiana. Do we add the of Indiana part on there? Or is it just Alzheimer's Association?
Of Greater Indiana. Yeah, I think that'll work.
Okay. Perfect. Okay. And so you're involved in outreach, education, and then connecting families with resources when they're facing Alzheimer's diagnosis. So, well, great. Why don't you tell us a little bit about how you became involved in Alzheimer's Association?
Yeah. So when I first got this job, I certainly was drawn to it because during the process of going through interviews and learning more about the association, it's a really exciting time for Alzheimer's due to a lot of research that's happening now and new treatments that are now available for the first time in history. So part of my job is focused on community education. And so being able to share with people what the warning signs of Alzheimer's and dementia are, is really exciting because these new treatments that are FDA approved, they do slow the progression of the disease. They're not a cure. They were just FDA approved within the last few years, and people can access them when they're in the early stages of their diagnosis. So, if someone doesn't know those warning signs, then if they catch it too late, they might have lost that window that they would have been, qualified to enter into those treatments or some really exciting trials that are happening. So when I was learning more about the association and going through the interview process, it really excited me to be able to be a part of this time in history that is really groundbreaking research when it comes to Alzheimer's and dementia. So with that, when I was starting this job and talking to my family, I didn't think we had any personal ties. And then my mother was able to say, well, you knew this person and this person in our families had dementia. And it really kind of made me think and realize that there's a lot of misconceptions around the disease, a lot of stigma. So, it made me question, was it, something I didn't recognize because I just thought it's a normal part of aging. Maybe someone did tell me they had dementia and I just thought, oh, okay, that's normal, and dementia is not a normal part of aging. I know that now. But then also kind of that stigma, like maybe we just didn't talk about it as a family openly because, it's something that scares people or something that they really don't want to talk about. So it was really interesting to kind of get this job and understand all of these things that are surrounding the disease as well when it comes to conversations and understanding it. So, it's been a learning curve jumping into this role and kind of understanding the disease and how it impacts families and the community.
Sure.
Mhm. Wow. I do think a lot of people have that stigma where it didn't used to be talked about as much. People kind of just, so I'm not surprised that I think most of us probably have people from, our childhood that were older in our families and we didn't even realize that's what was happening. So, yeah.
Yeah, I think you're right. And, we are a volunteer driven organization. And that's what a lot of our volunteers that are the community educators, that's what kind of brings them to volunteer with us and go out and do presentations, because they were a caregiver and maybe they thought people didn't know how to maybe include their loved one in conversations or family gatherings, and didn't know all of those little things that we now teach, about how to interact and include people with the disease. And understanding it's not a part of normal aging, and everyone does need to know those warning signs, because even if you're younger or older, you're probably going to know people, and it'll be really important to be able to have those hard conversations of, have you talked to your doctor about this? I've noticed this thing changing about you. Do you think there's something more there? Because again, people need to know about those new treatments and all the resources that they can access as well.
What are some of those warning signs that we, as the adult child, should be aware of, to kind of be mindful of with our own parents and watching for?
Yeah, we have like it's like a 10, we love 10. So we have like these 10 warning signs that we like to share with people. And it's that concept of things that interrupt daily life. So, many of us will forget where we left our keys, or maybe forget where we placed something. But the idea is that that's normal aging. Some cognitive decline is normal as people age. But if you aren't able to retrace your steps to remember where you left your keys or left your coffee mug, then maybe that's something you need to see if that's happening more often. Also, if you notice that your loved one is having problems like doing their bills, and that was never an issue for them before, if they just can't keep like a ledger like they used to, that's something to keep on top of as well. If you're seeing mood changes, if they're just not acting like themselves, or even if they are withdrawing from social activities that they enjoy. So, if they used to go to church every Sunday, or, go to a Bible study, or if they were involved in a civics organization, or went out to coffee weekly with their friends every Saturday morning, if they're withdrawing from activities like that, ask, why are you not going to those things anymore? Because that is a warning sign that we share with people if they're kind of withdrawing, or, if you have family gatherings and they're hanging out at a different part of the house or something, they don't maybe like being a part of the conversations because they feel like they can't keep up. Those are things to kind of stay on top of and notice and track and possibly talk to your doctor about.
Sure. So yes, most of our, just to back trace a little bit, most of our listeners are females ages 35 to about 50. And they are by default almost caring for aging parents while they're also managing their families and careers. So it's great to talk about the signs, the early signs, because we can slow down the progress now, which is amazing. So when a loved one does receive that diagnosis, what should a family do first?
Yeah, I think educating themselves is kind of the main thing first. And, people deal with it differently. So whether it's a care partner, a spouse, or, a child or a friend or whoever they're working with, everyone kind of deals with it differently. But educating yourself, I think, is the number one thing. There's lots of, I talk about new treatments, and a lot of them do slow that progression, but there's always new medications coming out for the symptom management too. So, being able to know what's available if someone's dealing with a different behavior and they don't know how to deal with that, maybe they can look up what sorts of, medication is available for that because new things are coming out. But I think educating yourself on the stages of dementia is important so you can understand and plan for the future. Have conversations early. So we always tell people, you guys probably encourage this a lot in your profession because another reason why we are talking about early detection is because we want people who are living through a diagnosis to share what their wishes are, whether that be, what they want to happen with their home, or if they get to a later stage of something like dementia, what type of setting do they want to be in? Who do they want to be around them? They can have those conversations of financially, what do they want to happen with their money? So they can make sure that all the paperwork's in place and all of the wishes that they have are known. And also the family can do their best to, have included them in that conversation when they're having to make the decisions.
Yeah, we do talk about that a lot with the people at our Indie Senior Living Series event that is targeted more toward the seniors themselves. Oh my goodness. We talk about this and just planning early all the time, just while
I think it's like the number one piece of advice that every person gives when we ask is just start planning early and often and having those conversations early and often. Yeah.
Yeah. And, another thing is just knowing about organizations like ours, because we have resources like caregiver support groups. So if someone is in a diagnosis and they are overwhelmed or don't even know what to do, they might not even know what they need yet, but they know they're going to need some sort of support. Caregiver support groups are just amazing places and spaces. People can come in and just share, whether it's kind of like an emotional venting or dumping that they want to do. Support groups can be that. Oftentimes they'll get very topic specific, like, who did you go to for advice on this legal issue? And, you can get recommendations of, local organizations that help them with, in-home services, what questions they asked when they were trying to figure out what type of help they would need and what agencies they can use. So it's, it kind of goes in a million different directions depending on what the group needs. And it's really amazing when you see, I've been to some groups where there's people who have been to the support group now for years. And, they create their own little community within, the monthly space that they get together. And then someone comes and they just have questions and you find out like, oh, I went to one and, the person didn't have a local neurologist and their loved one had been living with dementia for years. So then everyone was like, well, you need a neurologist and here's some good ones in the area. And here's why they're good for, people like your loved one who are living with dementia. So they kind of just help new people meet them where they're at. People don't have to share if they don't want to. It could just be getting away for an hour and being there with people who understand what they're living. So,
what they're going through.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Support groups can be great for that too.
You transitioned right into where I was going. What other free or low cost resources are there? And by the way, are those support groups, are they free? And how do people find them?
Yep. So
that was like 10 questions all in one.
I might be able to answer it in one sentence.
There you go.
They are free and they're in many local communities around the state and country, really. So if someone's listening to this and they live in Indiana like us, or if they're, in a whole nother state, and sometimes caregivers live in a very different area, than their loved ones. So we have caregiver support groups all around the country. And something I wanted to mention with that too. So people can access that they can find out where they are through our 24/7 helpline. That's also a free resource. So it's 800-272-3900. And people can call that number and ask about support groups locally to them. And we do have some specialized support groups as well. Mostly they're virtual, but even if you're from a certain community or we have one for young adults who are caregivers to their adult parents who are dealing with dementia. So if you're younger caregiver, you can access a virtual Zoom that will just be people around your age. We also have a few others that are very people living with dementia. We might also have virtual support groups available to them as well. People in the early stages that are, dealing with life changing. We do have some support groups available that are virtual for people living with the disease as well. So that's all free. That 24/7 helpline, that's also available for anything Alzheimer's or dementia related. So if someone wants to attend an education program in their community, they'll tell you where presentations are taking place and when. Same with the support groups. Also, if someone just wants to call, if it's 9:00 at night and they are just emotionally overloaded and feel overwhelmed and need someone to talk to, they can call that helpline. They'll reach a real person, and it's going to be, someone they can talk to that understands and knows what they're going through. We have people available all the time to talk, even if it's just for emotional support that a caregiver needs in that moment.
That's great.
Wow.
And if they wanted to find these resources online, they're not a, dial a number kind of person. There's a website they can go to, right?
Yeah, alz.org. That is our website, and there's just so much information there. It can be overwhelming at times.
Yeah.
But we're going to have hopefully the information you're looking for. So if you want to know about those 10 warning signs, just go on alz.org and search 10 warning signs. If you have questions about, legal issues you're dealing with, all that paperwork we talked about, behaviors, communication, just anything. We have kind of these new microlearnings that we're talking about too on our website, and they are for people in that early stage of diagnosis, whether it's someone living with the disease or a caregiver. And so we have learnings and videos they can watch when it comes to how to deal emotionally with a diagnosis. You can hear from people who have been through it. They have advice. We have things you can think about and information that'll be helpful to you. Same with how to include your whole family in and surrounding a person and a caregiver. So what information can you share with your family members, help them understand and be involved? Just lots and lots of different topics. And I'm trying to name a bunch, and it's just I could go on all day. So
right. The moral of the story is there's lots of free resources for people. You don't have to just push your way through this alone. There are tons of resources out there, and really you could just go to alz.org to find many of them. Sounds like.
I would imagine that sometimes if you're dealing with a brand new diagnosis for a loved one, like it may be hard to open up to the people that are closest to you at first. So I feel like sometimes just having those support groups that are outside people that have already been in it, like you mentioned for years, they've been attending, like what a valuable resource those other attendees could be for somebody that's just newly navigating this journey. On the 24/7 line that they can call, who are the people that are answering the phone?
We have master level clinicians at that number, and we have lots of people who are kind of expert agents, but all of our folks at the 800 number are trained specifically on dementia. So, if someone has that question of, hey, I'm noticing different things in my brain, they can talk through, is this a warning sign? What questions should you ask your doctor? What diagnostic testing is available? They can talk to you about those things. Or if it's a caregiver, they can help them with that or anything else. But the people who work there they're experts. They can kind of help any sort of question you have. And if you call and you have a more in-depth question, maybe it's, I'm a caregiver, I am caring for a loved one and they've been told this treatment is an option for them. I asked my doctor some questions and I really didn't feel like they answered them all the questions I had or something, We do have care consultations as well. So that's a little bit more in depth where you're going to talk to someone who has, that at least that master's levels degree, and they can really deep dive into that with you and answer as many questions as they can, tell you, here's what a better question, way you can maybe ask your doctor, and here's what the science is telling us about this treatment and things like that. So they're able to kind of dive a little deeper, like I said, into any of the issues you have. And many of them will also, I've heard people have called and maybe they have a behavior related issue they're trying to figure out with their loved one. And so the idea through the care consultations is always to kind of go towards a solution or a resolution if there's an issue that's specifically addressed in the call too. So it's, it's not just a conversation where they're, gonna, talk. They're gonna try to come up with a plan with you of, here's what I'm hearing, here's what you're needing. If you had this, it would be helpful to you, so they can try to figure out a solution when they've identified, not the problem, but what issue you're trying to resolve in a relationship, whether that's with your loved one, a physician, a family member, or whatever. I know sometimes people even call and they have their loved one, the person living with dementia, in a 3-way conversation where, all right, let's talk this through as a group. What are you feeling right now? Why are you feeling it? How would you feel better? So they'll know how to, kind of facilitate conversation if needed. So the people there are just trained. It's their specialty. And, that's continued training happening all the time, depending on, what's new in the environment of the disease.
Yeah, that's really
So
great.
you're not, I like that. You're not just calling a call center where, you're going to get transferred. It's like a real person, and not only a real person, but an expert in the field of Alzheimer's care.
Absolutely. And they're all over the country. I know there's some in our area too. So they're, embedded in communities all across the United States, answering and helping people as they need.
Yeah.
So you're out in the community every day, and you hear people's stories. Is there a particular story that stands out, something that really highlights why your work matters?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Often, we table a lot of events to make sure people have the information they need. So that's always nice when people come up and say, I've called the 800 number and here's how it was able to help me. And there's all this evidence out there that does show that when people call, even if it's one time, if a caregiver calls one time, it does help their mental state. They don't feel alone, or they feel better equipped, in the situation. But I would say usually when we're doing educational presentations, that's when people, oftentimes are able, it's a longer, usually it's about an hour and a half that we have conversations. And those are nice because, people, some of them are caregiver skill building. So we have presentations that are focused on communicating effectively. And so I love those because throughout the presentation, there's areas to stop, and everyone, has a different experience with this disease. And if we have 5 people at a table, all 5 of them are going to have different needs, different things coming up for them, different situations. And so it's so nice to be able to say, have you thought about this when you're communicating? Did they like to be called honey? Did they like to hug? Did they like to be touched? Did they not? So, maybe it's coming to one of our seminars and them realizing, oh, you know what? My mother really did like to be touched and hugged. So then you can kind of integrate that more into the communication that you have with that person. You can, hold their hand when you come in, or make sure and touch their shoulder, they react to that positively and make them feel more comfortable. Communicating. And maybe, if it's a day where someone's agitated, maybe you just put on some music and sit there with them, and that's your communication for the day. So being able, when people can sit down and kind of answer questions and talk as a group, when caregivers can talk as a group, those are the moments that really feel so impactful. And then they can share situations like we had just said, and, oh, well, this worked for me yesterday. and it felt really nice, or, oh, I've had that same problem. What have you done? So when people can take the information we're saying and ideas and strategies we're sharing and really implement it and kind of become, its own synergy. Those are the moments that I think are best in people, whether, their loved ones living at home or living in a facility, I think there's so much commonality between the caregiver experience.
For sure.
And just the feeling, oh, someone else gets it for a minute is so nice.
Yeah. We're going to take a quick break and just hear from our title sponsor so you can reapply your lip gloss, get a drink of coffee, whatever. The Sandwich Generation podcast is brought to you by Indie Real Estate Experts. We're a real estate brokerage dedicated to helping seniors and their loved ones downsize with less stress and more support. And we're proud advocates of dignified aging. From sorting and packing to selling and settling in, our team handles every detail so you don't have to. Whether you're helping a family member transition or planning ahead for yourself, we're here to guide you every step of the way. Learn more at downsizingindie.com, where compassion meets real estate.
Yeah. As you were talking about, just helping people navigate through it, it made me think of a story. Just so you know, Robin, my background, I worked a lot in a senior community, but also in home health. And it made me think of a patient we had in home health one time who was struggling with dementia. Her husband was struggling just caring for her, and she was very anxious. Constantly kind of just like getting into things. And he was struggling because he was exhausted. He was like, I have to do all these things to keep our house going and functioning, do the grocery shopping and all this stuff. But he felt like he was 100% babysitter too, and I hate using that term, but that's how he was just so concerned about her, getting into something that could harm her or wandering off or whatever. And so the Alzheimer's Association actually helped us in just some of the tools that they had online to figure out, okay, what can we do? What questions can we ask him that can give us a better plan to keep her busy during the day? Because we were having caregivers come in, but there weren't a lot of things set up for, like activities wise. And so in talking with him, we found out that she worked in a flower shop for years. They actually owned a flower shop for years. And so that was what she did, right? She made arrangements and whatever. And so we ended up working with him. We went to, your local thrift shop. We got tons of fake flowers, tons of different vases, and they had plenty already at their house, but we got a bunch more, and we made an entire closet that was just that. And you could just open that closet and say, oh, we have 4 people that need to come pick up flower arrangements today. Can you help us get them ready? And she would spend hours making these arrangements, and it kept her mind busy. It kept her doing something physically and gave him a little bit of a break to, take a shower and not feel like she was going to do something, get into something that could be harmful while he was doing that. It would keep her really busy. So I love the way that the Alzheimer's Association puts that education and those tools out there for you to be able to, as the person going through it, you can figure out how to, get a plan together and get some activities together that are going to benefit your loved one. So that made me think of that story when you were talking about, the ways that they help the caregiver. So
that's a great story. I'm actually going to share that with somebody that I know who's struggling with 2 parents with Alzheimer's in a senior community. And I tried to get her to read some books, but I think this podcast might be good for her. But just that worry of them constantly getting into something, or one of them's a little just getting into things and being testy sometimes. And she's trying to work herself and just never knows when she's going to get a call from the community that, you know, one of her parents has gotten into something and, you know, they need her to come there or whatever. So I love that story. I'm going to share that with her.
Yeah.
I'll share
There was
this
another
podcast
lady
with her.
that lived in the senior community that I lived in who had been a librarian in her, you know, as her career. And we had a library. I'm not saying that word right. There. And so she was still like pretty high functioning to where you could just hand her a stack of books and be like, hey, we need these to be, you know, reshelved. And she would get them back on the shelves where they needed to go. So it was just, sometimes it's just finding things that they can relate to from their
Yeah.
life and find a way to get that integrated back into their daily routine, you know? So she put all the books away at the library. No one needed to do that anymore because that was her job, you know? She liked that. So it
I
is
love that.
That's awesome.
cool to find ways that make them feel useful too. Yeah.
Yeah. And included. I love that.
Mhm.
So you mentioned earlier about families starting those conversations with their loved ones, starting them early when they start to see those early signs. Um, how do you recommend, or is there a resource on the website, families start those tough conversations like about driving? That's a huge one.
That's a huge
Caregiver needs, memory testing, those sorts of things.
Yeah. We have a worksheet on our website for this. Actually, the company is kind of part of our education program. So you can look that up and it actually asks questions of like, what's a good place to have it? Like, you know, is there certain places that will put people more at ease to where they'll be more active? Do they like coffee and have a coffee shop they like? And also, you know, the idea of, you know, are there people you could or should include in the conversation? Like maybe if you're not the right person that you think they would respond to, maybe you can ask someone that they trust. You know, maybe they'd be a better person. Like you can call them and say, hey, have you noticed these things? If so, would you feel comfortable talking about it? Here's some things, here's some questions you could ask. I found this resource or whatever. You know, so I think thinking about the environment, thinking of who should be included and who shouldn't. You know, I know if, you know, you get 5 people around a table with one person, that might not be the best approach.
Right. Like
so
we're having
maybe
an intervention kind of thing. Yeah.
Yeah. So maybe it's a friend and maybe not, you know, you if you're a daughter. Maybe you are that right person. You know, who knows? Maybe even if they're comfortable with it, going to the doctor with them and making sure that it's brought up. And, you know, you want people to be included in the conversation. So just see, can I go with you and talk about it? Or, you know, make a list before you go to a doctor's office to make sure you're bringing up the things you wanted to. I know when I go to the doctor, I feel very rushed. I'm sometimes, depending on the personality, possibly a little intimidated. But, you know, if I have 2 questions I want to ask, and it's my goal to get that done, if I write them down and have them in front of me, you know, I'm probably going to do that more so. So I think thinking about the little things like that is really important, and maybe have a little specificity to it too. Be like, you know, I noticed last week you forgot that you were, you know, meeting me for lunch. You know, has that been happening a lot? So maybe having some examples too, so they just don't feel like what you're saying is unfounded. But we do have that worksheet. So if it's something you're nervous about or unsure how to broach, feel free to go to the website and find that to help as you prepare if you're a little nervous about, because they are tough conversations. And that's about bringing up if you notice changes. But yeah, when someone is diagnosed and you want to take away their keys, or you're wondering if it's the right time to take away their keys, there are resources out there, but the conversation itself can be so hard to have.
Yeah.
So part of our website is just for driving. We have when you talked about, you know, wandering, we have another part of our website on that. So some of those things come up so often. So yeah, they're hard, but they're difficult conversations.
Yeah. And, you know, those difficult conversations are the ones that are the most important conversations a lot of times. And I was thinking while you were talking, Yeah. If you're like, if it's depending on your relationship with the person, if it's like a daughter and a father, does a father see their daughter as like, still their daughter, still their baby? And so are they going to take them seriously? So getting a third person or an outside person that's not so close involved is sometimes better, and making it sort of that the person's own decision, or their own idea. Yeah.
Yeah. And,
Good stuff.
I think the diagnostics are kind of evolving and changing as well, which is really exciting because I've heard stories of people who have like been through the testing and they're like pen and paper and, they're doing some things on paper and answering questions, but the research is coming up. And, right now there's blood tests available in some areas where doctors are learning how to, as part of your normal blood draw every year, they're now advancements are happening where maybe in your area they have that sort of testing that can find the proteins that are, people know is Alzheimer's. So people can have better diagnostic tools to find those things. So it's important too, I think, even if it's, you're having warning signs and maybe you're nervous about talking to the person, say, have you asked your doctor if they're testing you for this and how, and asked about some of the newer things that are available because, diagnostics are just so exciting to where it's becoming easier and easier and to pinpoint, where in the past I don't think it has been.
I think those
No,
help
it
too.
hasn't. That's great.
Yeah, and they can do a lot of those now too to help make sure they're on the right medications. Whereas before it was like trial, you have to try it, you have to see how it
Trial
affects
and
you.
error.
Yeah, and now there's a lot more of those blood tests they can do where they can kind of determine like this medication is going to work way better for you than this one based off of, some of that research and findings. So yeah, making sure you're up on what some of the new things are that can be helpful for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, and some are still like the blood testing still kind of it's still in like a clinical trial sort of stage, but researchers are just so adamant that it's going to be readily available in the coming years when I've heard them speak. So it's super exciting. And, if you have questions on any of those things too, people at our helpline can help answer those questions as well of like, what's the latest with, these blood tests I'm hearing about, or what's the newest treatment and things like that. We have our website, alz.org/treatment, has really excellent information on who qualifies, what's the latest information to know when it comes to that. And we also have the same for research. If you go to alz.org/research, you can hear about the latest research taking place and what might be available in your community that you can access through a clinical trial. We just released our 2025 facts and figures, and it kind of shocked me the levels at what people are open to clinical trials when it comes to this disease. So,
interesting.
there's a little bit of, clinical trials. People are, from my experience, when I've talked to people about it in the past, they've been very hesitant. Like, I don't really trust that. I don't want to be a guinea pig. There's all these ideas around it. But people are way more open to it than I thought they would be. And I think specifically Alzheimer's and dementia, I think people are even possibly more open to it because possibly they know about some of these new things coming out and how exciting there are, or they say, I've seen someone live through this disease and I want to be part of finding, the solutions to
solution.
Cure. Yeah. So I think it was really heartwarming to see those statistics. I don't know if that's the right word, but statistics that,
just data. Yeah.
So to find, advancements. So it was really great to see that.
Yeah, that is.
Yeah, that's exciting. We're going to put your website and the phone number in the description of this video, of this podcast, on Spotify. We also post it on YouTube so that our listeners and the people who are watching, our total audience, will have easy access to the site and to the number. So it's because it sounds like just an amazing resource for people navigating this. So,
do you have any and you may not be able to answer this, but are there any new kind of cool advances with some technology stuff in the past year or two that are helping caregivers care for their loved ones? Is anything new to share on that front?
Well, you said technology. So the first thing my brain went to, because I just did a webinar on this Friday, was we do have a new app we released a few weeks ago.
Okay.
It's called My Alz Journey. So it's My ALZ Journey. You can find it, I think, on all the normal places you find apps. And that's specifically, again, for people to navigate, whether they're living with Alzheimer's or dementia themselves, or they're a caregiver. You download it, ask a few questions. It's completely anonymous, but they'll ask questions like, are you a caregiver or do you have a diagnosis? Where are you at? Were you diagnosed last week or a year ago? What are some needs you have? And then depending on how you answer these questions at the beginning, it takes you on a path to the information that would be helpful to you at the time.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So maybe it's changes in relationships. You talked about that a minute ago. We have some new videos that were released on changes in relationships. If you're a spouse to someone, like you were talking about, and now you feel more like at times a babysitter, or, you're dealing with another way that you're feeling, it'll give you information on that you can look at. And then if you log in the next day, it'll give you new and different information. So each day you log in, it kind of gives you a little, nugget or something of information that you might be looking for, helpful tomorrow or a week from now. And it's the same for people living with dementia. With those new treatments, and everyone advances in different ways, people living with dementia have a lot of needs and resources available to them too. So we're making sure that, if you're on that, I've met people on these new treatments where they've been diagnosed 7 years ago, and you just would never know that they have that.
Is that right?
Because those new treatments have just really slowed that progression for them, and they can still really mostly live a normal life. But they're dealing with all of the emotions that come with it, and, changes in their relationships with, their caregivers and people in their lives. So the app is for them too, as they kind of deal with understanding, new way of life and what they're living with. So we do have that. I'm really excited to your question about the blood tests and where we see that goes in the next few years. So that's sort of some research that I'm really keeping an eye on to tell the people in my life and loved ones. Genetic testing. Right now, I hear a lot of people when I'm out in the community, they're doing that new genetic testing to see if they have, some of those biomarkers for things like Alzheimer's, so they can maybe be prepared. Research is actually showing now that lifestyle changes are possibly linked to, risk reduction for things like dementia. So that's really exciting too. Age is the number one risk factor for a disease like dementia, but there are things that we can change within our lifestyle. And I just did this presentation a few weeks ago and it was really fun. But, even things like managing your diabetes, being smoke-free, controlling your blood pressure, sleeping well, physical activity is the thing. If they say there's one thing that you can do, it's physical activity. And we hear these things often. And basically what we're our main thing that we're telling people is if you've heard it's good for your heart, it's good for your brain too. So that's what research is telling us. It's not just here's some ways to live a healthy lifestyle. It's like, this is research backed now, and we're, following these things and seeing how, they develop, and people, and it is showing that differences are coming up in the research.
Amazing.
Yeah, it's really exciting.
Yeah. When you, and we don't have to dive deep into this because it's a resource on the website, but in terms of lifestyle changes, does it also address eating, diet, that sort of thing?
Yep. And in the presentation that we do on this, when it comes to eating well, there's 2 diets that they talk about specifically. One of them is the DASH diet. Do you know what that stands for?
No,
I don't know.
Hypertension sort of thing. So it's like, I wish I had it in front of me for the acronym. I probably shouldn't have said it, but they talk about the DASH diet.
I'm looking it up right now.
Okay, great. And the other diet that they talk about specifically is the Mediterranean diet.
Yeah, I love.
Oh, I
yeah.
have heard of that one.
Yeah,
I try
it's
to. I try to use that one in my daily
There you
life.
yeah, it's like those healthy fats,
Mhm.
eating, fruits and vegetables and nuts and things like that, and trying to not eat all the fried foods and, the red meats and, keep to the lean meats. So, but those are the two diets that they specifically call out as saying, look into these and we, support these.
Dietary approaches to stop hypertension.
Yep, that's
It's a
Dash.
flexible, heart-healthy eating plan specifically designed to help prevent lower high blood pressure. Okay.
It
So,
sounds
yeah.
like it very. I mean, it's focuses on fruits, vegetables, whole grains, lean proteins. It
Yeah.
sounds very similar to the Mediterranean diet. So
So interesting.
cool.
Yeah, it is so interesting. And another thing that stuck out to me doing that presentation is the sleep one, of course, and how you can
Yeah.
make sure you're comfortable, take away distractions at night so you can sleep better. But their recommendation was 6 hours of sleep every night at a minimum.
Mhm.
Oh gosh. I'm like a 9 to 10 hour a night sleeper, but it doesn't ever happen. So I supplement with naps. I don't know where that falls into the sleep thing, but
Yeah, I don't remember anything about napping, but I can't imagine it hurts.
No, yeah. Just even taking the time to shut your brain down and kind of relax
yeah.
has to be somewhat helpful.
There are, I think there are parts of the country that they do have like the nap siesta kind of time. I'm a fan.
yeah.
I'm a fan of the naps.
Yeah.
Anyway.
So if you want to get involved with supporting the Alzheimer's Association, I know you guys have some great fundraisers that you really promote and do, like the longest day, I know is coming up next month, right? June. So tell us about how we can just get involved and help support.
Yeah, there's lots of different ways. Of course, we do have our fundraising efforts, and we have the Walk to End Alzheimer's. Indianapolis is actually number 4 in the whole country for the amount of money raised. It's really exciting. We're kind of
It's a fun walk. I've done it many times. It's a fun walk.
You? Yeah,
we were gonna do it this past year, and we just Sarah. I talked to Dave Holder about joining his team, and then we never did it.
It was
We
on
wanted
a
to do
weekend that we had some. I think we had something else. But yeah. Mm.
Yeah. So wasn't able to go last year. So I'm really excited to attend it this year. So we have the walk, and that's coming up like September, October, depending on where you live. That's kind of the time of the year that they schedule those. And then we have the longest day coming up next month. And the idea behind that is it's the longest day of the year. And so we're kind of walking alongside of our folks living with dementia on that day. So that's coming up next month, and that's more flexible of like, if you like playing pickleball, if you like doing crochet, if you like making flowers, like make it into a fundraiser, and you can fundraise for the Alzheimer's Association. So it's a little bit more structured to whatever that person's interests is like are. And, I've met people who sell wreaths or, have the pickleball tournaments or just do something locally. That's kind of fun for them and their friends to get together and do and fundraise. And one of the things that I love about the Alzheimer's Association is we have, tons of money going into the research like we talked about, and we're third to the United States federal government and also the Chinese government in funders. So we're the number 1 nonprofit right under those 2 sources of Alzheimer's and dementia research funding. And we have a lot of money here in Indiana. I think we have actively over $6 million just in the state. We're kind of a leader when it comes to some of the research happening with the disease. So it's really exciting. But we have lots of other ways people can get involved. My team, we are kind of on what they call the care and support team. And so we train community educators to go out and do those presentations on healthy living, what the research is saying. What are the 10 warning signs? Caregiver skill building, like I talked about, we have lots of presentations on those. So people can get trained through us and go out and deliver those presentations in their community to different groups of folks. And so that's a way that you can just give your time and it makes a big impact. Another thing I wanted to mention is we do have our AIM. It's AIM. It's an acronym. Alzheimer's Impact Movement, I think is what it stands for. And so those are people who create relationships with their lawmakers, and they try to make sure that they know we need to support programming. We need to continue to fund research for these things. We have so much momentum right now going on through the research we're funding. NIH research funding has really grown a lot over the past 10 years. And that's how these new treatments have become available, is because the research money has been funneled into it. So we're trying to make sure lawmakers know those things and understand the advancements and the potential. So they're creating relationships and making sure that, we continue funding for some of the programs. Indiana has some interesting programs too for dementia. Every community is covered by a dementia outreach specialist through their area on aging. And so that's a state-funded program that we're trying to make sure lawmakers continue paying attention to and putting funding into. So if that's your thing, if you're like into being at the state house and talking to your lawmakers, we also need representatives for us going out and creating those relationships and having those conversations with their lawmakers.
That's
great.
Awesome.
Yeah.
I have to say, I love seeing people just really lean into something that's really helping the community and helping people. And I love seeing you lean into that. And you have brought yourself up to speed in terms of, Alzheimer's and what the Alzheimer's Association offers, and just educating. I love to see that, Robin. I'm really happy and proud to know you and just see your work. So that's great. Yeah.
Well, thanks for having us. I mean, the worst thing to hear when you work at a place like this is, I wish, and you guys might hear this too, like, I knew about you 2 years ago when I really needed you. And so it's like able to have opportunities like this, hopefully someone will hear the information and, whether they need it or not, maybe they'll remember it for their friend that is, going through, being a caregiver, needs the information. Hey, I heard about this, helpline through the Alzheimer's Association. You should call, so making sure that people just know about the resources is so impactful and our number one priority.
Absolutely.
That's our goal too.
I agree. Yeah, it is. It stinks to hear that. Like, oh, I wish I would have known about you 2 years ago when I was downsizing my mom, or, whatever. So it's getting the word out, and you guys are doing a great job. So thank you so much.
Yeah, it was really fun. It was nice to see you both.
Yeah, nice to see you. Well, as always, please give us some likes, follows, comments, shares. Share this with anyone that you think might benefit. And we'll see you back here next week on The Sandwich Generation.